Hello, I'm Sean D. Francis, and I've been a GM, DM for Dungeons and Dragons, Top Secret, Gamma World, Star Frontiers, Torg, Vampire, Paranoia, and a bunch of other role playing games, off and on since 1984, 86. When I started playing D&D, I couldn't afford all the supplements and adventure modules for Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms, the two campaign worlds that were published at that point in time. And I started writing my own adventures and building out my own campaign worlds. I took some of my experience and created a campaign builder workbook to help dungeon masters who are interested in making their own homebrew campaign. There's a link to the blog post I wrote about the campaign builder workbook, which is also a guide that walks you through every aspect of the workbook. That link is in the video description notes below, to the side, depending on where this is being published. This video series will be a walkthrough of how to use that workbook. It'll be a live example. The Campaign Builder Workbook is not a world building system. That's an important distinction to make. It is a system that works in conjunction with world building. It has you focus on those elements of your world that your players and their characters will interact with immediately, now, the first things that they encounter, and helps you plan for what they will interact with later. This uses what I call a local to global methodology, and it gives you maximum flexibility in creating your campaign setting, letting you start playing as soon as you have the basics down and lets you change things up as your players interact with the campaign. Let's take a look at that workbook. It is a simple spreadsheet that you will be working off of. I use it in Google Sheets. Actually, let me focus on the initial one, the one that you'll be seeing immediately. So the link takes you to this spreadsheet where you can make your own copy and begin filling it out on your own. I thought an interesting way to demonstrate the workbook would be to run through creating a campaign setting from scratch. Though I'm not sure how interesting it will be watching someone fill in a spreadsheet. I just felt this was more interesting than really just kind of a video walkthrough of each element and over explaining the whole thing. And as much as I would love to explain everything about the workbook, I've already made one attempt at that. It makes for a very long video, and it's not a very interesting video. So for more explanation, for more detail, check out the guide that's linked in the video description, and that does go into more intense detail about every aspect of this workbook. This is going to be a multi-video series. Each video will be about 20 minutes long, and I hope to cover all the material in 9 minutes, hopefully less, and hopefully not more, but I'm shooting for 9 videos in this series. So we can get started on this. I'm going to zoom in a bit. So once you make your own copy, you have your spreadsheet in front of you. We're going to start filling out what is called the campaign survey. And if there's a theme to this entire system, it would be start small and build up from there. The campaign survey is where we collect. Damn it. So once you've made your own copy of the Campaign Builder Workbook, this is what you get. It's the spreadsheet, and we're going to start filling out tab 1, the campaign survey. If there was a theme to this entire campaign creation system, it would be start small and build up from there. The campaign survey is where we collect the most basic information about our campaign setting and is broken into geographic designations: the starting village, the region, the country, the continental area. This represents the physical locations the player characters will encounter in the campaign in the order in which they will be encountered. So let's start with the starting village. We start with the name of the village. This is kind of an important aspect of the entire process. As much as I wanted to do this from scratch, I can't help but already have started thinking of aspects of what I wanted in this demonstration. So I already have a name for the village, which was Blackrock Keep. It is going to be a military outpost on the frontier of the kingdom. Now we get to select the village government. And this just kind of defines how is the village governed. And in the guide, I go through and explain pretty much each of these options. But it's kind of obvious. You have an elected mayor, you have an elected council, you have a town hall, which is, think of kind of New England, Newhart style governance where everybody in the town gets to vote on everything, like pure democracy, and all the evils that come with just a pure democracy system. Brutal authorities, which is just a strong man has taken control. It's more of a tribal concept, but it can play out pretty much everywhere. Noble is your standard. Think Downton Abbey. That was a noble-led village. Lord Grantham leading the village. I am choosing that since this is a keep, this is a military facility that's out on the borderland, and it isn't keep on the borderland, the famous Dungeons and Dragons module. This is just a keep that happens to be on the frontier. Honest, I'm not planning to rip them off. So it's going to be a military authority. And now we get into the concept of the purpose of the village. Every village has a purpose. Villages just don't spring up randomly. They spring up in locations in which people need to live for a certain industry to exist, or because it is a natural gathering spot. So we can look at the different kinds of purposes. You have farming villages, you have mining villages, fishing villages, villages that spring up on river fords where the easiest spot to cross a river, crossroads or major trade routes cross, frontier fortresses, keeps on the borderland kind of thing. Castles, which are similar to a frontier fortress, but they're usually more interior, bigger, more well defended. Temples, church, cathedral kind of villages. Forestry. Homesteads are kind of like farming, but they're really just peasants who live further away, and their farming is meant for themselves, to feed themselves, not to feed the kingdom. Hunting camps, trade route bottlenecks, which think of kind of valleys where it's easier for horses and carriages and wagons to move through instead of rocky terrain. So there's these kind of natural bottlenecks that form. And then oases, which is kind of a similar thing. It's a place where you can get fresh water. And don't think of that just in desert terms. Even across the United States, when settlers were heading out west, spots where you can get fresh water were important. And they became places where people started gathering and settling, setting up shop. This is obviously going to be a frontier fortress. And then we get into village size. And this is another critical thing to think about. If a village is too large, and actually I have notes on this, I just want to make sure I cover it. A small village means the players will be able to know the entire village. They get bored by it and want to explore the bigger world. Large means the town, city itself needs to be explored. It becomes a point of adventure in and of itself, which does not encourage the players to go out and experience the world. So I get the desire to have a large, big town to start from, where you have all these interesting NPCs and everything. But if everything is interesting in the town, there's no reason to leave the town. If there's adventure in the town, then they're going to stay in the town. You may want that. You may not want to define the bigger world in which the PCs are going to explore. From my point of view, I like a small, tiny town that does not have a lot of resources, that forces the player characters to venture forth, move away from the town for more adventure, bigger treasure, better challenges. But the town itself is knowable. They'll be able to know all the major NPCs, and it's not unreasonable for a first level character to interact with the mayor, to interact with the most powerful individuals in the village. So I like tiny and small villages for that reason. Nothing's written in stone. There's a whole reason why every option is available there, so you can have metropolis starting villages if you want. But that's my personal opinion, is start them in something that is completely knowable right from the start, and then make them bored of that location so they want to move on and explore the rest of the world. I also like to start the campaign with threats. These are not necessarily immediate adventures, but these are things that are looming on the horizon that the PCs need to be aware of. And I like to start with 3 different kinds of threats: a natural threat, a political threat, and a martial threat, a military threat. Not necessarily a military, but something that needs to be confronted in a physical way. It can't be something that can be easily negotiated out of. There's definitely a military physical aspect to resolving this threat. So natural threats, and again, in the guide we go into more of these, but this is disease, this is storms, this is the natural world. And since this is D&D, the natural world includes magical things. So you can have curses and wild magic storms in there as well. As I said, I've already kind of thought about this a bit, and I'm going to stick with kind of a pure animal threat. And I'm going to say that the forest in which Blackrock Keep is near is filled with wild wolves, and this is kind of a new threat to the village. Political threats are threats that tend to be resolved through social interaction. They're not necessarily, they can erupt into violence, but it's not the main aspect of it. You can have family versus family. Think the Montagues and the Capulets, and that certainly did erupt into violence. But for the most part, it's just that rivalry between 2 families in the city. You can have boss versus workers, which is like if you have a mine owner and the miners, and there may be conflict there. You can have 2 different city leaders vying for power. You can see, you can get a gist of it. And again, I do outline all this in the guide, but I'm going to go for city leader versus community leader. And I have some thoughts on where I want to go with that. But I like the idea that you have this military authority over the village, but the village itself aren't part of the military, so they may have some conflicting goals. The martial threat. So what is threatening the village? And this is kind of your standard first levels 1, 2, 3 kind of threats, bandits. I go into much greater detail on what I mean by minor tribals, but this is the kobolds, goblins, orcs, those kind of humanoids that may be encountered in first, second, third, fourth level of your character. I'm going to go with bullies, and this can mean many different things. This really just means that within the city there are people who are strong arming other people. So there you go. It's something that's going to have to be dealt with in a physical way. They may be criminal. They may be just mean people. They may be outsiders who've come in. They may be townies who are just too big for their britches, kind of thing. But I have the idea of some corrupt town guards. So these are representatives from the keep who basically are sent down into the village to keep peace in the village, and they have taken the authority too much on, and they've become corrupt. They coerce people into giving them extra money, free food, free drink, that sort of thing. And they're just not good people. And they're not obviously not good people. Like, they're not running rampant. There's no clear evidence. They keep it kind of on the down low. They keep it quiet. But everyone's kind of afraid of them and bends over backwards to not cross them. Every village needs a long-term goal. Every village wants to accomplish something. So Blackrock Keep, I'm going to say that since this is a small village, they do not have a cleric. There wouldn't be a reason for a person, a cleric, to be in this village constantly. And it could be. You may want to have someone like that in your village. But for the most part, clerics and magic users need a larger community to support them, because their spells cost money, cost resources like that, and they need to make sure they have that way of getting that money to cast those spells. So I kind of adopt the idea of, like, during the Middle Ages, even during the American West, preachers, ministers would be itinerant. They'd be like Justice of the Peace, and they would have 2 or 3 villages in which they would kind of travel between and administer. So for the most part, there is not a shrine temple in this small village for a cleric. And this village has been here for a while, and they may want that. They may want to be a little bit more established. They may want to build that shrine or temple. So they want to build a temple. That could then lead into some conflict with the keep. The keep may want to have some control over who is going to be the cleric of that temple, what the temple is dedicated to. There could be all sorts of conflict in doing that, and even where the temple is located, who owns the land, all that sort of thing. So that's a long-term goal of the village. That is what the village leaders are kind of focused on, what the community is focused on, what the people in the village are talking about, planning for, all of that sort of thing. So now we get into the NPCs of the village. Who is the leader of the village? This is going to be a military leader. I like captains. I love, there's something about captains. They're in charge, but they're not so high up that they're bogged down with bureaucracy. And they're not so low that they don't have a lot of authority. I think that's why things like Star Trek work out well, because you have the captains of the ship and they're the absolute authority of the ship, but they still are part of a larger organization. They still have to answer to people. So I like the idea of captains. A captain is the nominal leader of the village. And I have a whole list of names here. So I'm going to go with Captain Learian. And I'm going to say that Captain Learian is an elfish captain. And I'm already thinking that Captain Learian, while the authority of the village, probably doesn't lead the village. She probably is more focused on ranging, about going on patrols out into the wilderness. To her, maintaining the village is an annoying extra bit of work that she doesn't necessarily want to have to deal with. So she outsources that. So we get into the most powerful NPC in the village. Power really does mean the person who has kind of an ultimate authority. In this case, Captain Learian was probably the most powerful, but she's abdicated the power to somebody else, and she's passed it down to one of her lieutenants. And I can never spell lieutenant without looking it up. So LT, Lieutenant Toriak, and we're going to say Lieutenant Toriak is an elf as well. But so this is where things start coming together. Lieutenant Toriak will be in charge of the town guards and may be very aware that the town guards are corrupt. In fact, Lieutenant Toriak may be corrupt himself, which then gets us into our most influential NPC in the area. I've already thought that this keep has been here for a generation or so. It is not a new village. It's been here for a while, which means that soldiers who've been stationed at the keep may have been stationed there and then retired and have moved on to other parts of their life. So I have another name written down here. Let me just... Kellen Odera. It's a human, retired soldier, and a retired soldier needs a role in the village. That would make sense why this person is most influential. Most likely influential because the people of the village see this person as the go-between between the keep, the authority of the keep, and themselves. So I'm going to say innkeeper, because that is kind of that important middle ground. It's kind of a small village for an inn, so it's probably not going to be like a massive tavern kind of place, but it's going to be a separate, I don't want to get too technical, but kind of a separate logistic area beyond the keep. So that is where other food will be coming into. It's the main entertainment source for the village and for the keep. So it gives Callan some authority, and because Callan has existed both on the military side and now on the village side, knows both sides of the world. But we gotta explain, like, maybe Callan didn't retire at will. Maybe there was some bad blood between Callan and the captain. So that gets us into the city leader versus community leader conflict. And that means that while Callan may know Lieutenant Toriak is corrupt, Callan saying that to Captain Learian just dismisses it as Callan being the silly human, the constant complainer, like, just won't believe it, which creates all sorts of conflict there that maybe some PCs can come in as outsiders with a third-party point of view and resolve. So now we get to the most knowledgeable NPC. I like breaking up the NPC, the types of NPCs, into different categories. That way, when the PCs are engaging with them, they're seeing different aspects of the village. If all of these individuals were either one NPC or part of the military, part of the keep, or part of the village, it'd be harder for the PCs to see every aspect of the village and get the different points of views without throwing in some random low-level, non-powerful, why are they around NPCs to explain the corrupt town guards kind of thing to the PC. So having somebody who's knowledgeable, and I'm already thinking, I've already said that there's no cleric in this village, but as a military installation, they need to have some healing. So I'm just, so this is going to be a healer, but it's not going to be a military healer. So this may be somebody within the community who's a healer that the military relies upon. I like the idea of the doctor. In the guide, I make note. I watched a lot of Little House on the Prairie before watching this as an example of small town village life. And the doctor, who's actually a veterinarian, who ends up doing dental work and ophthalmology and all sorts of other things. He's obviously the most knowledgeable person in the village. So I like that kind of character. I want a dwarven doctor. And we're going to have Doc, like Snow White, Doc Dunspar, dwarven healer. So I have a whole other write-up on NPCs and NPC classes, and one of the NPC classes I have is healer, and it just means that as a healer it can allow PCs to expend hit dice to heal. So it's just a it's basically a healing potion in human form. Now we get into points of adventure. These are areas that we define right off the bat as interesting areas that PCs could go to, could explore. There may be calls to action to send them there, but they're just something where adventure will happen. And it allows you to start planning your first adventures. I mean, your very first adventure may be something that's inside the town. It may be a reason why the PCs are at this town. But then beyond that, once they prove they're capable within the town, like they, off the top of my head, they may be guards for a shipment that's coming to the town. Maybe the keep ordered a bunch of weapons, and the blacksmith who made the weapons hired them on as guards and sent them to this town. So they've arrived at the town. They've been paid for the work they did, and now they're hanging around town. And that's when these other points of adventure, calls to action, may arise. So right off the bat, these are just samples. Don't say that these are the only things you have to choose from. These are just to help generate additional ideas. You can use these. You can add your own. I just like the idea of having something that can start with right off the bat. Like I have Goblin War Party Camp, but maybe you want that to be kobolds. Maybe you want that to be gnolls. Maybe you want that to be orcs. Maybe you want that to be some sort of constructs. That's entirely up to you. I'm going to go with keeping it on the natural theme. We already have wild wolves in the forest. I'm going to say that the forest is dangerous. It's a dangerous forest that needs to be investigated. That's going to be my first point of adventure. I also want something to bring in something magical to this. We haven't talked a lot about magic and the interesting world of the arcane. So I'm going to have a Fey circle, and this may be something benevolent, it may be something malevolent, but there's definitely an area of the forest in which the Fey are very active. And I'm not trying to we're not trying to tell the story yet. We're just kind of throwing this stuff out there. We can change any of this before we start playing. Like as we start developing the themes, start developing everything we want to do, we can start defining this a little bit better. So our third point of adventure, let me think. So I'm imagining that we have this wilderness, we have this expanse of unexplored territory, and I like the idea of dungeon crawling. So I'm going to have caverns. There's something in the caverns that's been awakened, something that needs to be explored. Not sure yet. I just know there's weird caverns out there that need to be explored. It's a point of adventure. It's something for the PCs to do. So I said I wanted to try to keep these videos short. So I am going to say this is the end of the first video. The next video will deal with the region and probably country. We'll probably be able to get both those sections done, and the continental area. The continental area is something that can go through real quick. It's something I don't necessarily deal with that much. I don't need a lot of detail to start about the continental area. And if you're wondering what I mean by continental area, read the guide, explains it. But we're going to wrap up there for phase one. If you have any questions, if you want to share your thoughts on campaign creation, I would love to hear it. I'm at SeanDFrancis.com. I'm Sean at SeanDFrancis.com. You can send me a tweet at SeanDFrancis. So yeah, let's connect. Let's talk about your campaign setting. Let's talk about if this is a useful tool for you, because I would like to know. I created this with the thought of helping a few of my friends who were thinking about getting into being dungeon masters and creating games, creating a campaign. So I would like to know if this is useful as a tool for other people as well. So see you in the next video.